Hi, everybody. So excited. Oh, are we starting? Okay. Okay, I'll wait for your chat then. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dr. Leann Pereira. I'm the Senior Director of Organizational Psych at Emtrain. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live session. Today we have Christine Tao. I'm so excited. Christine Tao is the CEO of SoundingBoard. SoundingBoard is a scalable leadership development and coaching management platform. Christine has recently received her Series B funding of $30 million. Christine, welcome to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Leann. I'm looking forward to it.
Super. So today we're going to talk all about coaching, the ins and outs, but we can't let the fact that Christine received her Series B funding go without talking about how you got to this place. And it is phenomenal because I remember talking to you a couple of years ago when you were just sort of starting, and what a phenomenal ride that's been. So if it's okay, I'd love to start there.
Yeah, no, I remember that conversation too, like it was yesterday, but maybe that's just how time is nowadays. um, yeah, I mean, we're really excited. I came into entrepreneurship or sounding board really because of my own personal experience. So, spent the better part of my early career in tech at Google and YouTube and some venture-backed startups here in the Bay Area where I'm based. But what inspired me to start Sounding Board really was my own experience. I was at a hyper growth startup. It was a company called Tapjoy where I was employee 30, so pretty early. And the business really took off. We ended up scaling the business to over $100 million in revenue. I went from being just an individual contributor on the sales side to suddenly I was running this entire sales team, a global sales team, and I had been promoted into executive management. And I'd never done that job before. And I think I was really lucky because that was over 10 years ago. And at that time, it wasn't that common for everybody to get a coach. But our board and our CEO felt, as a new executive, that was important for me to up level my leadership skills quickly. And so they gave me a coach to work with. And I guess I'd say like the rest is sort of history. I loved it. I ended up bringing coaching in for my entire team, even my newer middle managers, and just saw how impactful it was. I was able to build a team that had, high retention, very low attrition, and I got to promote a lot from within because of that investment. And my co-founder at Sounding Board actually is my coach. So, it's like the hair club for men. I say this like, I'm not just the president, I'm also a client. And Lori is just an incredible coach. She's done this for as long as coaching has been around, was one of the first 300 certified in the profession. So we're really lucky that we get to translate all of her 25 years of domain expertise into the tools, the software, and the managed network of coaches that we have delivering our solutions.
So many things I want to ask you from there. So obviously, when you were at Tapjoy, you had been promoted to executive leadership. They saw it wasn't so much your luck at being promoted. They saw your skill, but perhaps the luck that they were able to identify that you could benefit from coaching, right? And again, skill. Maybe they saw that insight. And so the first question I have for you, this is a little bit aside from what we had been talking about. Who benefits from coaching? Is it usually reserved? It's usually reserved for those high potential folks, or is it who should get coaching in your estimation?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is the paradigm that we see shifting now, because if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the answer was really, as an industry, C-level execs. And sometimes it was, underperforming C-level execs that, somebody had an attitude problem or, something like that they needed to correct. And what we've seen over the last few years is that really accelerated through the pandemic has been, no, actually coaching has shown to be one of the most impactful ways you can develop leaders. And with technology, we now have an opportunity to do that at much earlier stages in leaders' careers when they need it most. And having technology is critical because obviously you and I are talking online. So being able to deliver that in a virtual format, a scalable format, we're just seeing right now that the pace of change that's happening in every single company is so fast that sometimes if you spend all your time developing, a specific training, that might not necessarily be as relevant to that specific leader based on the environment that they're in. So I think training and coaching go really well together because we think of it as, how do you put into practice a lot of the content and concepts that leaders are getting exposed to? Now they can actually apply that to their day-to-day work and the challenges that they're facing.
I can't, that is so insightful. The fact that, it's usually been through education and training that we've developed people. And that is really a very fixed approach a lot of the times. Like you have content that you have to deliver. And we know from K through 12 that just doesn't work for everybody, right? Like one curriculum doesn't work for everybody. And so the ability to make that accessible and adapt and have that learning with somebody as a partner is super important in this very dynamic environment. And what about what we've seen with all of the new challenges leaders have had to face that nobody else has ever had to face, like George Floyd's murder, Me Too, scaling everything at the same time, and all these issues that come into play. What do you think about all of that? I mean, has that been something that your coaches or that your organization has heard about in the coaching need?
Yeah, I do think that's a big driver for why coaching as a modality of learning is gaining the attention. And especially we're seeing that happen at, sort of like the most forward thinking people companies, large enterprises, but even companies that you wouldn't normally think would be making that level of investment. And I think it has to do with exactly what you said, that there is so much coming at our leaders today, from your executive management all the way down to think about your first time managers that are now having to learn how to lead a team remotely, and they're doing it for the first time, right? There's so many unique challenges, and that doesn't even take into account all of the responsibility that they might be carrying personally, whether that's caring for a loved one, the ongoing sort of challenges we see, like you said, that are specific to people of color, to women, to parents. And so I think it's a unique time. But one thing we do say a lot at Sounding Board is that it's not as if a lot of this didn't exist before. What the pandemic has done is really kind of opened that up and brought that up to the forefront. And so I think there's this real recognition within companies like, oh my God, now I can see all the challenges that leaders are carrying versus it being this like separate thing over here that you could leave at home when you went to work. And that really has led to this real awakening around, oh my God, we need to do something, and it's urgent that we do something to support our leaders.
It's urgent. In fact, so a couple of things you touched upon. So the remoteness and the fact that leadership is virtual, management is virtual, that is a whole separate set of skills. And now, everybody has their Instagram feeds, their news feeds, their Facebook feeds. And so the amount of time, the face time you get with your social media and those influences just eclipses any time you might get with your manager or leader, right? And still, leaders have to navigate and make sure that they're on point with engaging folks, or that they're setting things up correctly, or that they're addressing these needs for connection. And so it's massive. So what do we do about the remoteness? How have you seen coaching be the right solution in this time of remote management and leadership?
Yeah, I think, we think a lot at Sounding Board about there's organizational level responsibility, and then there's also individual responsibility or, capabilities that need to be built. And both of those have to be there to really create a successful environment in this very volatile environment that we're in. And what I mean by that is that we are seeing a lot of companies think about whether it's broader policies, flexibility, solutions, or initiatives that they're investing in to be able to create what I talk about as capacity for their employees, right? And that might address a wealth of things across, employee wellness, employee well-being. It might be mental health. It might be time off and flexibility. But really, this idea that the organization also has to participate and create the right environment to up-level the amount of capacity that their employees have to be able to show up and do your best work. I think the other side we think a lot about is then that's not enough, right? Yes, you have to create the right environment and create one that's conducive, but then you also actually have to invest in building up the capabilities of your team to meet all of these challenges. A lot of managers are navigating how to lead remote teams for the first time, right? And they may have realized, we've seen in our research, the leadership capabilities that are needed for leaders to be effective is shifting over time
Very
because of the
interesting.
environment. And so we see a lot of companies investing in, whether it's learning, training, coaching, all of these different ways to actually help also build the capability side of their employees and leaders so that they can be effective. And you need both of those things really to allow somebody to come to work and do their best work, right?
So if I were leading an L&D function, you mentioned two really important things. First is the capacity, which is the org level infrastructure to support capability training. So it's capacity, which to me sounds like, is it even accessible and available? Can the org actually provide the space and the resources and the reinforcements to make this stuff stick, right? So it's almost like, can they scale learning across the enterprise? Is that somewhat?
I think that's absolutely one piece of it. You got it at the org level. And then if you think about just breaking that down to me and you, how does that then translate down to an individual level? Like, I'm Christine. Yes, I run a company. I also am, a working parent. I have other things going on in my life outside of work, which can impact my ability to show up, right? And so is there support systems, policies that allow me to be flexible? Like, I can go take my kids to a doctor's appointment in the middle of the day, and not feel guilty about it because that has to happen.
Oh, I
I
love
think
it.
there's all these different things that then translate down into my own individual capacity as an employee or a leader to be able to just be present at work, right? And I think that's when, I know it sounds like you have some response to that, but I think that's kind of how we think about capacity. And the reason I bring it up a lot is that the capability side is important because you also need your leaders to be up leveled and skilled, and you want them to have that capacity to be able to take on that learning, because it's learning, it takes work, it takes time, it takes motivation, and those two things are sort of hand in hand. You can't really do one without thinking about the other, or else your programs or the ways that the impact that you see, we believe won't be as outsized.
Absolutely. And so I remember designing an engineering skills. So that's a capability thing, right? So we were going to teach folks these engineering skills, but what was super important is that I had to work with the leadership team to make sure that we had the time on Fridays, and it was over a quarter, right? And that we would do this for 6 hours, and we would provide them lunch. So we had to structure the learning within the context of their workflow and that type of thing. And what I'm hearing from you is that it's very dynamic these days. So organizations really do need to be very flexible to allow for this learning to occur.
And I think, like you said, you want your leaders to role model that, right? And show that, one, not only do they support it because they say they support it, but when it actually happens, they're actually truly allowing that to happen. And that they also are role modeling that behavior that shows to everybody else that it's actually really okay. It's not just a policy.
Oh, so let's jump to capability quickly, because you said something that I don't want to forget. You said that leadership skills have what's been important has shifted a bit over time. Could you expand on that a little bit? What have you seen?
Yeah. So at SoundingBoard, part of our platform is that we actually have a capabilities framework that underpins how we focus our coaching alongside very clear goals and outcomes. So we actually have this incredible amount of data that tells us, what are the top 3 leadership capabilities that leaders are working on? How does that differ by level in the organization? And then also, how has that shifted over time? We actually put out a report recently. It was a leadership coaching report. We surveyed over 400 L&D practitioners, and we started to see that self-awareness actually became one of the most important skills that was really starting to emerge, alongside some of the tried and true ones you and I would expect. Communication, more important and critical than ever before. Strategic thinking, prioritization, all of these things. I think there's some that we know are persistent, but others we've seen, agility and sort of ability to adaptability, something that we know we've had to do. But I think what we're seeing is that some of those skills are shifting in terms of the level of importance and how much it's coming up as a capability those leaders have to develop to be able to deal with just the highly changing environment that we're in.
So people are bringing this up, and maybe in performance. Is it showing up in performance reviews, or is it showing up in job descriptions? How is it when it comes up? Is it coming up in conversations, one-on-one conversations? Is that where?
We have a tool. It's called the leadership roadmap. Think of it as a developmental plan that a leader can engage with their coach. So we see it in the goals that they're setting. What capabilities are they developing as a result of driving towards those goals? And what insights and actions are they generating out of that? So what we see now is just that these capabilities are almost just ingrained into the outcomes that you're trying to drive at work. And a goal might have you actually developing several of these skills at the same time.
Okay, interesting. Is there a right way? So you mentioned, and I very much believe that an individualized learning plan is absolutely critical to learning because it has to be intentional, right? This isn't implicit learning where it's sort of happening on the side and you don't really need to pay attention. This is very explicit intentional learning. Um, what do you think the what do you think from an instructional side, just so from the platform side, is there a best way to go about this program? And then I'm going to ask you from a learner side, what's the best way that the learner could come into the program? Like, so two questions.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on this too, because this is a core part of your background and expertise. But one of the things that we've seen is that you have to start first with what is personal and relevant in terms of a goal or outcome to that leader. Because part of it is just that, one, it makes it that much more tangible. It increases the motivation and commitment to that. And then actually we see the capability building is kind of below that, meaning if you say like, hey, Leann, like, you're going to work on your communication. Have that in mind, right? But it's like such a sort of ephemeral thing. It's harder to feel tangible about how do you progress against that. Very different than saying, Christine, we're going to work on how you run more effective meetings and align folks within that meeting, and maybe even specifically a set of audience within the company you're trying to impact. Am I going to learn how to develop my communication as part of that? Absolutely, right? But it's different because I care a lot about that as a goal as a leader. You're helping me solve a pressing problem that I know I need to solve. And so I think that's kind of where we're seeing learning kind of get turned on its head, which is, let's start first with what's relevant to you as the learner or the leader or the organization, and then kind of interweave the skill building and capability into that, right? But it's not the other way around, which I think a lot
Right.
of learning has focused on in the past.
Yeah, there is a lot of research that supports that. Even neuroscientific research, where they say, and I like Richard Boyatzis in particular. He calls it the personal emotional attractor, and he makes this argument that if you don't build this vision of resonance where you have an emotional investment, then you're actually training leaders into incapacity, because learning requires this openness to experience, and you need to it's a pull thing, right? You really need to go there, and your brain fires differently when that happens. And he says that most organizations will start with the data and say, oh, you're weak in this, you're weak in this. And the person's on the defensive. And now you're starting off on the wrong foot entirely. And so I love that, that I think you're aligned with it for what it's worth. It seems perfectly aligned with the research base and neuropsychology in that. So that's a wonderful start. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. And look, I've noticed someone is wondering, why are you and I talking about this today, Leann? I mean, I certainly can share my thoughts, but I'm curious, what you'd want to say about that.
Well, I do think that that coaching is the gold standard in learning, in all forms of learning, whether you're in K-12 or you're in executive education. The ability to get that one-on-one with somebody is what we would all strive for. It's not the classroom. It's not sitting in a big ILT. It's really understanding the individual. And companies have not embraced it because they thought, perhaps to Christine's opening point, that, this is just for the C-suite, or you actually just reserve it for somebody who is remedial, which I think is so funny. And so I think that we're here to influence the learning community, and those who are serious about their development and learning, to really consider coaching as something that they should be looking into. That's what I'm here for. How about you, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is something we talked about before the call, Leann, which was, you know, both of you and I are all about learning in every form, right? And we also know, like you said, it's not one size fits all. And certainly companies also always have to think about scalability and different ways they can reach their employees. But we're just starting, both of us are seeing how much coaching is getting attached to, or even in some cases, alongside or replacing even traditional learning methods. And so I think what's really interesting is that, one is the topic you and I both really care about, but two, just that as both of us being leaders that care a lot about how we can develop more authentic, high functioning workplaces, just to explore the different ways that's happening today.
I also want to say that, philosophically, if you look at a company, what is it other than a community of learners, right? So I'm all into the learning of it. And if you're not learning and developing, a company learns and develops when its people learn and develop, right? And so fundamentally, it's really about the being able to learn together, develop together, and move forward. And if not for that, certainly our IT isn't going to do it. I love AI, but our IT is not going to do it. And so, to me, this is the heart of why companies exist, right? I mean, or how companies exist, not the why, but the how. It's all about the learning and the growth of the people, which then translates into the learning and the growth of the company.
Such a great point. Such a great point.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes. Is there anything? So let me just jump back to your learning and developments. And what are some things? And people probably ask you this all the time, and it might change. But
Yeah.
what are the things, the lessons that stick out in your mind as some of the greatest things that you've learned over your journey?
Well, I will say, I've always been someone that is just naturally curious and always wanting to learn. I'm also just a bit competitive, so I'm always like, oh, how do I, get better at this and that? But I think one of the things that I've realized, especially as a founder, and then because of the work we do in engaging across so many leaders at every level in an org, is that the most successful leaders that we see, and myself included, are always like up leveling their skills. You hear this phrase a lot around lifelong learning, but it's especially critical, I think, now given the pace of change in companies. Skills that you learned just like a year ago might not be as relevant to even your job as they were then. And so it's almost become this like must have. And then we see it on the flip side, which is companies are seeing that their employees and leaders want that out of and expect that out of the companies that they work with. Like, hey, how are you going to help me continue to develop my career, develop my skills, up level my professional and career ambitions? And so it's just something that I think I've seen, one, it's something that has helped me, drive success in my own career, but also just that is really something that is what employees are wanting out of the organizations that they join.
I don't see any other questions, and we're just about at the top of the hour. Christine, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and congratulate you on your Series B and your growth. I look forward to seeing what happens in the future. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. This was such a treat, Leann, and look forward to many more conversations in the future.
Likewise. Excellent. All right, Hasina, thank you very much. Back to you.
Bye, everyone.
All right. So I'm going to let you go, and then I'll reach back out for a meeting with Janine. Thank you again, Christine.
Oh, that was so fun. You're so fun. You're like high energy, and I love it. So it was great.
Likewise. Okay, see you again soon then.
Bye.
Bye.